Chilly here with Sirius Talis Moon. Jupiter hour, Mars day. Jupiter is 16 degrees Cancer, Moon 13 degrees Pisces, Venus 18 degrees Taurus, and Mercury 28 degrees Pisces. I want to talk about Chiron in Gemini because after addressing all the Chirons, the astrology of Chiron, because Uranus is already rubbing shoulders with my own Chiron at, I believe, 1 degree of Gemini. Now, here's the thing. Gemini is numbers. Gemini is the phase of language development that begins with mimicry. And one of the things and Gemini is also jokes and double entendres. One of the things that I received was something was intended as an insult that was talking about chameleon, comedian, and now here's the thing. Chameleon is a part of the symptoms that arise from trauma development that people associate with the personality split axis. Pardon my DSM, okay? There were times in my life where the DSM, particularly when Neptune was beginning to sextile my Neptune, then the DSM was found useful because Neptune rules psychiatry, and a harmonious aspect from Neptune means psychiatrist or psychiatry can be benefic. Actually, around my Neptune square was stripping that in order to prevent those who try to make me strip other things. um, and this was where a Neptune hard aspect means that the psychiatry and even channeling is going through a crisis. Neptune sextile, um, I began to really notice all the things around manifestation and um, and begin to shift my thinking into a more positive matter of thinking. And later, I would be introduced to Abraham Hicks by actually a relationship coach. And Scott, imagine you learn how to do relationship coaching, and you're an apprentice, and one of the very first people you do an apprenticeship on is a person that deals with, since age 0, something to do with by proxy, no touch, torture, and ritual abuse. And they don't know it. And you don't know what it is. And the models that you study for communication and Mercury also rules cameras, is to observe the situation as though a person watching from a hidden camera would watch. What would they see? Model Efrat has 9/11. And just think about the Chiron in Gemini and how the models for curating communication collapse. But it's a 9/11 type of collapse. There are casualties. There are. It's a World Trade Center collapse type of thing. Um, Uranus is life energy. Mercury is words. Think about growing in a country which words around sexuality and sexual energies are all war related. Even the penis is being weaponized. Very difficult to get turned on with such a language. Now, the chameleon effect is basically, it's not a jab. I had this. This um, is basically when one's um, impressions and even facial expressions and mannerisms are non-volitionally mimicking the environment. A lot of people that have psychic attacks are dealing with mimicry. I also dealt with that. And the people that were like born into the Epstein rings, they they have that a lot. You see people talking. Sometimes you see different people talking. It's like the same person talking. So whether it's like personality cult, but all of that is facilitated through these like rape rituals that create that development trauma that affects language acquisition. Now, here's the thing about me. I could acquire almost any language. My Arab, I forgot completely. I knew how to read in Arab. I could listen to Al Jazeera and actually understand what they say. I forgot completely. I see the Arab notes, and I don't know how to read them. But when I was taking Arabic in high school for 2 years, we had to take another major. I had to take French to not be recruited to intelligence. I literally don't remember Arab. I learned the language, I forgot the language. Um, and I could learn almost every language except for ancient Greek. Now, I'm sure I'm going to find out something about that language too, because I don't know what texts were. In fact, let's famous ancient Greek stuff. Because that probably would be my prediction is that this language would be used. And here's the thing, English is my emotional language because I learned English around age 11, 12. I began to write in English at around age 12, simply for material reasons. I believe that I won't be able to make a living selling to small crowds. And I said, well, everybody around was saying, oh, but it's impossible to learn English to the level that you can be, let's say, an author. And I say, try me. Rao in Gemini, Rao is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is just going to put more effort. It's just going to be more dedicated. It's just going to work harder, or more, with more dedication, which is enough rest and enough work. And when I was working at marketing, they would give me all the American clients, and a lot of them would not suspect that I'm not American, which um, now that has to do with one thing, but um, the attempts to get me back to the Hebrew, particularly, was one of the times I was going to therapy. It was not that therapy. There was really a lot of insistence to get me to speak in Hebrew. Although when I and here is another thing that was problematic, because English was my emotional language, and actually even when I went to that therapy, um, then the minute my emotions were involved, I just walked to the meeting one day and began to speak in English. After several months, I spoke in Hebrew, and and there was judgment of my speaking in English. But the Hebrew language is also esoteric language, and the there was actually a Epstein form of Kabbalah. Now I understand use of my language to try to change the to try to how should I say that? There's a word, but there is a frequency around that word. And people that went through, whether astral or not, type of rape, um, find it challenging to have access to that, because the frequency under a language has to be without rape. And there are psychologically there is the use of words as alleviating and let's say name it to tame it, and then there is a use of word that is actually energizing, and that pertains to the intention and the sexual energy around it. But that's something that's relevant for people um, that are not raped. In fact, people are raped so that they could be siphoned by their practices. Okay, so we had Iliad and Odyssey by Homer, Trojan War, A, Trojan War, Theogony Works and Days by Hesiod, Foundation of Greek Mythology and Daily Life, Homeric hymns dedicated to the gods. Those are probably used by the esoterics that were used also by the Epsteins. So studying ancient Greek would get me involved with the frequencies of these languages, and that was fortunately barred. It was one of the craziest things because I spoke so fluent basic German that I was teaching the foundations to a doctor that needed that for legal documents. Not as a legal advisor, I wasn't exceeding my domain, but um, first things I read in Dutch was cold cases and the legal documents of people that were threatened by assassination, the documents that they send, the litigation that they send to the colleagues that threatened them. The alt scale. um, it's kind of like I barely speak Dutch, but when but when I read, it's legal documents. And that was my practice. I have Pluto, Saturn, and 22 Mars in the ninth house. So Pluto would be something around the core foundations of, and it's also a cult. Saturn could be a legal document or paperwork, and Mars 22 can be cold cases, very, very simply put. Um, it's also ruler of Mercury, and Mercury is ruler of my fourth house, and that would be where the number one true crime. Aries can be also about being the number one in something. Although Aries competes with itself. Um, and all these things are associated also with real estate and housing. So with ancient Greek, it was really funny because I would meet up with, it was one of the first times that I experienced really, really challenging episodes in my life, and that was I was sitting with a teacher, all the things I never had to do for anything, except for several things to do with logics and linguistics, because I would have a different thinking when it comes to logic, then I would find it very difficult to understand the reasoning of people before me. I could have a lot of interesting conversations in class, but I would have a different reasoning. Fortunately, my teachers were up, but they were trying to see how do they get me to pass a course in lexicon. It was it was quite similar. I would I would fail to a miserable degree in lexicon. I'd and and my teacher was like, "Yeah, you have your own thinking. You just need to refer to like the other thinkers and see how you respond to them." But it was difficult for me to understand the other thinkers. So when I'm trying to see what was happening, I was sitting with the person who was teaching the classes, and then there was a student that she was excellent at breaking down everything. She taught Farsi in 8200. So Farsi is like the Icelandic of Arabic. eh, in terms of grammar. And she sat there and she tries to break down the logic of ancient Greek to me. And I sit there and I just feel like I've reached a blind zone, a dead zone, an area 51 in my linguistic capacity. And no matter what, I could not. It was like Moses and the coal. Greco Persian Wars, Sparta, island of Lesbos. Now, everything, as philosopher of science, everything is based on, we begin with the West thinking, we begin with breaking down everything into the Greek components. And yet the language I could not. um, and I was in Greece, so I knew how to read the letters, but I couldn't comprise the words from them. Um, there's a circular logic or tautology probably linked with the language that was not logical to me. But I don't know how that translates in language. And I think this pertains to the science and the occult, but I don't know why. That's probably used by some sort of the Epstein-like um, secret societies in ways that are not so happy for humanity. But I don't know what and why. Sparta, I know, is an attempt to. Sparta is Mein Kampf. Like if somebody asked me to explain Sparta in simple words, it's like 9/11 in simple English is not mine. This is actually channeling that I got when I was in Netherlands. 9/11 in simple English, moon was crossing my Saturn in Scorpio, and what I was hearing is like, how do you say 9/11 in simple English? And for me, it was like, what 9/11? What are you talking about? Y'all guys hear me talk about 9/11, but before that, it was not at all in my vocabulary. And I was like, okay, what? Fair trade. And that was so profound. Whether it's by what is traded there, think about the banks adding to invest in. Palantir is one study case of surveillance technologies that have a classified component. That classified component, everything you hear classified is Epstein. um, So when that's being traded, what do you think? Now it's all they're targeting people for what? For real estate. So what happens to the real estate of the people that sit and type on the computer? Oh, this stock went up. This stock went up. Yeah, invest in this stock. Yeah, invest in that stock. Boom. 9/11 on human trade is 9/11. Um, Now, or by the fact that to work at the trade centers, people had to have connections. And to have connections, they had to do stuff, probably to children. Is it every single rank? Probably not. Now, of course, 9/11 was probably a false flag that was a part of sacrificing that to create an even more world domination based type of economy. Nine 11 was a chapter before the subprime crisis. Um, of course, 5,000 people dead is terrible, but to prevent that, we would need to begin to look at what were the investments that were running through that building and what type of practices. The next chapter would expose that. That would be the subprime crisis, and that would be the first chapter in the Epstein files. Um, so, what would be the use of ancient Greek? Probably there would be some use of ancient Greek to induce a Spartan world. With that surrounds only around war, that is continuous. It's the ideation of the warrior on the account of life. Human nature, politics, and morality. But whenever there is a language or a barrel in language, it means that that language is used esoterically for something, and not being able to speak that language protected me from something. Same thing would happen to me with Dutch, even when my life depended on speaking Dutch. Let's take a look at that. Famous Dutch writings. The Discovery of Heaven, Existential Works as the Evening, Beyond Sleep, The Diary of Anne Frank. Well, The Diary of Anne Frank was translated. I couldn't be at the house of Anne Frank. It was too overwhelming energetically for me. Um, Jabs about me looking like Anne Frank. No, seriously, I do a channeling experiment, and I'm at, I think she was living around the Jordan, and then I hear like, welcome back. And I'm like, okay, somebody, now, Me coming from academics, doing a channeling experiment after being tortured. So we had to, and I'm like, there is bias to any type of communication. That shit got me out of being tortured in hospital. So I listen. um, by the way, I spoke with two women that survived sex trafficking. One had her child taken away from her. One did not have her child taken away from her. One dropped a madam that held 52 brothels. The other had to speak about her trafficking experience as prostitution. The lady that had to speak about the trafficking experience as prostitution constantly had channeling that were aiding her. That other lady didn't. When I tended to the topic of human trafficking, suddenly there was attempt to disrupt any sort of channeling. And even when it came to astrology, because I practiced astrology not just on the basis of channeling, then I would just look at the astrology. Um, okay. Foundational critical novel that exposed the corruption of Dutch colonialism in Indonesia. Max Havelaar, Multatuli. The Discovery of Heaven. Complex philosophical novel, often regarded as modern masterpiece. Existential account of post-war life in Amsterdam. Beyond Sleep. A psychological novel about the geologist's challenging expedition in Norway. Um, by the way, before I was traveling to Netherlands, there was interference in my sleep cycle. There still is interference in my sleep cycles. Um, Dark Room of Damocles. And the attempt was to get me to a certain point of lucidity. So bringing rest to the sleep, bringing restful state to the sleep state, and awakefulness to the sleep state, and restfulness to the waking state. Now, the good thing about it is that it can create very manifesting altered states, but but that can only be when sexuality is honored, and when the energy that emanates from the sexuality is still honoring of sexuality, not, for example, war crimes and stuff. Um, the Dark Room of Damocles, a classical thriller exploring ambiguity and betrayal during World War II. The Assaults, Memory and Trauma, Guilt Revolving World War II, Questioning Morality, A Man's Descent into Dementia, which also is a very neural aspect of existence. Um, the Diary of Anne Frank, children's book. Winter in Wartime, Dutch Resistance. Foundation 17th century works established foundational modern secular and philosophical thought, ethics, and Tractatus Theologico Politicus. Spinoza. Oh, I had no idea Spinoza was Dutch. Um, Actually, I met a person who was very much into his writings, but I was not sufficed with that state of existence. I did not find it suffices as a human existence. Of course, the 17th century is Enlightenment. So, do I find out why with these texts? And I would have an extreme emotional state when it comes to the language. Um, Pivoting from will to connect and a sense of overwhelm. Chiron in Gemini is the language development. So language development is around, at first it starts with mimicry. Now here's the thing, the children cannot express certain consonants and vowels. So the it's the developing of the ability to break constituents into, or break something into its constituents. And Mercury is also around numerics and and dissecting something, not in a cruel or gruesome way, but in, for example, when I was in school and we were studying mathematics, we had these little rectangles that and a different color, and Mercury is also colors because it's when we begin to divide the light into its components, divide the light frequency into its components, and different frequencies create different colors. So there, and the permeability, and that Mercury is also the door. So if I think about color, the permeability to light, or the permeability to which frequencies of light, is color. The level of permeability. Do I absorb light a lot? Then I'm in this color. Do I not? Do I deflect all light from me? Then I'm in that color. I don't remember which is white and which is black. Which is again the right and left, black and white, 0 and 1. I navigated entire Europe, but my mother was the driver. But I navigated entire Europe while mixing right and left. It has happened to me once in a giant highway. It's not American level of highways. American level of highways would be it would be Challenger. But by the way, I was contemplating on the moon being in Aquarius for United States chart, and the moon is the people, and how the structure or the infrastructure, because it's a Saturn sign, And in Aquarius, we require space. So each person having their own, ideally having their own space, but it's also the level of control and technology, particularly on the lunar stuff or through the lunar stuff. Um, Uranus going through Chiron is, of course, the astrology of Chiron. And I'm not 50 yet, so it's different to, probably different to have this transit after 50. Um, um, well, when it comes to, let's say, wait a second. Mm. Gemini is, of course, also sign of cities. I wonder if one could think about colonization as a wound around civil society. Because we are entering Uranus in Gemini in the context of Neptune being in Aries. If I think about Vogue, or what people call Dutch colonialism in Indonesia, but also, and later Suriname, but, or not later, then it began as the first traded company and as speculative investment where the rate of return was less than 50%. And this is what also began the life insurances for the families. Um, and that would be the foundation of later United States, including the colors of the flag. If I try to think why would studying a certain language be barred or would evoke all these things. Gemini, by the way, is also about something being duplicated. Um, and Gemini eventually is about deciding between two options. Chiron is the wounded healer, and that would mean that the teachings that apply to heal the Chiron related wounds, and in Gemini, they can be nervous system related, language acquisition related. For example, when we think about jurisdiction, when we talk about um, emotional violence or violent crimes, they interfere with linguistic capacities, and the nature of trauma interferes with coherent testimony. And this is where Gemini would get the line and trickery. For example, the people that experienced the violence, they had to look normal. And by the way, not looking normal is, and it leads us to another thing where Mercury, although in Virgo it's more like that, but Gemini is at the beginning of that, is also about cleanliness. And Mercury rules the hands. You think about how something being dirty can cause disgust, so that thing is not touched. And how people criticize the disgusting as if it is a behavioral problem of the child or the person. There is Virgo would be a more developed version of that, but in Gemini we play with the order of things. For example, when if you write a story or a storyline or a screenplay or whatnot, then having cards where we have the different scenes or the constituents of the story or the movie, and we take the pile of cards, the ordered pile of cards, and then we just, one of the exercises that I would do as a screenwriter is to just splash it all across the room. In fact, one of my when I edited my mother's book, the main thing to edit was like the dots or the punctuation that now, by the way, I don't remember how to do, um, but the one piece of content that I edited was changing a scene that was supposed to be in the end and putting that in the beginning. Gemini is playing with the orders, with the order of the constituents. One thing I can tell you something. Um, I'm channeling, and there was something to do with, not going to say names, not going to say anything, but somebody was, um, basically, I saw it in my dream state, and they saw certain somebody, and I said, when I see that person, I just see rules, 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 rules. And like, I don't like the people that say, don't make the rules and so on. And then I walk towards IKEA, and they have the warm water. And then there was this one of the type of the weeds that grow the yellow flowers. I'm like, that's amazing for the liver. And I picked some, and then there was like, oh no, no, no. I was like, what? You said do not obey the rules. Gemini would give us that type of natural humor. Um, and a wound in Gemini or Chiron in Gemini. By the way, Chiron in Gemini can absolutely be Epstein ring affiliated because under the guise of fun and play, something terrible would happen. And that's not me having tea with in IKEA from the yellow flowers. Under the lightheartedness of it's only fun and play. And so Chiron in Gemini um, can have the wound around that. And that wound is the prelinguistic phase or the phase of language development. Um, Mercury, of course, ruled by Mercury, of course, can also have to do with touch, and Chiron there creates a wound around that. Uranus going through that Chiron is about to liberate us from that chironic wound. In what way? It can be by seeing things differently or by addressing the grief around or addressing the wound. Um, Gemini can have to do with framing as well. So it can be a wound around being framed. And it can be a wound around being framed for something that happened. And now, before you're going to ask me, Mercury co-present with Chiron can give that. So, yeah, because it's like, oh, surely you're speaking about things that are, yeah, well, it can we can that can definitely be um, Mercury co-present with Chiron in any other sign, or Chiron transiting somebody's Mercury, which can happen by synastry. Let's say you have to work with someone and they have a Chiron conjoining your Mercury. I have to work with the spirit of the time, and the spirit of the time is Chiron on my Mercury right now. Um, or Chiron aspects to our Mercury. Mm, 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 mm. Rahu Chiron can both be feeling like materializing a wound, but also materializing the curation for the wound. Uranus Chiron transits. I try to think about when did Uranus go over Chiron. Let's see, when did we last have Uranus conjoining Chiron? The Uranus Chiron cycle, evolving door astrology. Wounding, healing, and liberation. Uranus and Chiron have a very unusual planetary cycle from conjunction to conjunction. The cycle varies dramatically in how long an aspect lasts and how long the cycle itself lasts. Because Uranus has a silly walk. And by the way, it is also derived from trauma. Right now, we're in a fascinating cycle and a remarkable part of their cycle. Evolution of climate change, women's rights, technology development. Yeah, a cycle of Uranus and Chiron conjunction. But when did we have that? Chiron relates to like your like or homeopathic principle. Embracing it in a new way that changes how you relate to it. Or it can be compared to Japanese practice of kintsugi, method of repairing broken pottery by turning it into a whole new or more beautiful work of art. In the same way, Chiron can heal by making the wound beautiful, useful, or transformative. Chiron can be. Oh, by the way, one of the things that have been recently shown is the use of how should I say it? Yesterday I was asleep and I saw somebody was like feeding the dark feelings to kind of like the lower astral or Luciferian spirits, I don't know, and then writing down like manifestations like presence and so on and so forth. Or somebody was trying to show the useful aspect of feeding our wounding to this certain spirits. Um, but then we have to be liberated of the notion that these spirits would want stuff or would want wounding. We can't, here is the thing, to generate a wounding to feed the spirits is where that falls flat. Now, if somebody is now here, people that have, let's say, it depends also on the aspects to Chiron because if I'm having, let's say, a Rahu Chiron, it means that something in my life generates certain wounds as I materialize my Rahu, and I'm not the only one, I know, and and feeding the bad feelings of that to the spirits alleviates this generation of wounding. Um, then 2030, I'm going to have a Rahu Ketu reversal, which means dematerializing that. I was going to talk about Rahu Ketu reversal as dematerializing what we have materialized, um, or materializing to dematerialize. There's something about when I had my Rahu reversal and I have Ketu in the 10th house. I think that would be around the aftermath of the subprime, and this is where I got to the best jobs, and then I dematerialized that and got funding for studies. And I have Uranus in the 10th house, so I was like, I was shit fuck suicidal. Nobody fucking cared. Then I got into debt by taking an antidepressant. um, it was forcing the pattern of getting into debt to move forward in life or to level up in life. And then only through volunteering to a certain open apartments project did I get access to housing. Well, and now I'm beginning to rethink about that time in my life, but that was basically climbing up the ladder and then dematerializing career altogether. To materialize studies. But through depth, through downfall. Uranus shakes things up in order to break the Saturnian mold that maintains consistency, stability, and endurance. Too much Saturn can mean you get stuck, so Uranus comes along to enable us to move forward. Yeah, but this is Saturn Uranus. I'm talking about. Oh, Chiron crosses the orbit of both Saturn and Uranus. But I don't have timetables for that. Okay, full cycle of Chiron and Uranus lasts 144 to 146 years. It can vary from 100 to 146 years. Because of the silly walk of Uranus. I don't know the Chiron itself cycle, but Uranus definitely has a really silly walk in terms of space and time. This is why it's so associated with anomalies in space and time that liberate us from constraints or dogmatic thinking about the space and time in relation to where it passes. For example, if I think about Uranus going through Taurus, what type of space and time do we need to have a positive sensual experience? And how do we adapt to the suddenness of the shift in that space and time? Okay. The sensual experience can also be creating a podcast or creating art. The aspects that make as they go. Uranus, by the way, can be a dissociate. It's not a dissociative state of Neptune, but Gemini is diverting the attention. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. The people that have the strategy of diverting